How are you, folks? Dave Brown here with the New Populace. Thank you again for joining me. So, yesterday I started going through an interview with Secretary of State Antony Blinken that he did at the Council on Foreign Relations with the President Richard Haas. Now, in that video, he was talking about the vision for the United States moving forward, the liberal world order. And in this video today, I want to cover the part where he talks about Taiwan and China. And as a reminder, the Council on Foreign Relations, this is the brain of the Washington, D.C. establishment. What they say there means a lot, means everything. And it really gives you insight into what the Washington, D.C. elites are thinking. So, interesting video, interesting comments on Taiwan. And let's get right into it.
That's a place we're going to get to.
So let's go to another place you recently were in, which was China. What is your definition of success? What is a realistic goal for American foreign policy towards China?
There's, at least in the near term, maybe even in the lifetimes of most people in this room, I don't think a clear finish line. This is more about getting to a place where we have peaceful and maybe somewhat more productive coexistence between us.
That'd be nice.
Because the bottom line is this: China's not going away, we're not going away. So, in the first instance, we have to find a way to coexist and coexist peacefully. We know we're in an intense competition. We talked about the competition to try to shape the post-Cold War era. At the same time, we are determined that that competition not veer into conflict, which would be terrible for everyone involved.
So what he was saying, talking about we are in competition, is the reemergence of great power or great power rivalries. And after the end of the Cold War, the United States, we were the unipower, and we were making all the decisions. But China has emerged now, and now we have the two powers. We're in conflict with one another, and we have different visions on how the world should operate. And this is why we have tensions, and this is why Tony Blinken went there to talk to the Chinese to try to work things out. And I'm not sure how productive that meeting was. It did do something, but when he came back, Joe Biden went and called Xi a dictator, and that kind of threw things back a little bit. So that's what Biden does. He's a knucklehead.
And it starts with some basics. It starts with actually building back sustained lines of communication. That was the purpose of the trip I made at the president's behest, to start to build that back. And I think you're going to start to see more engagement in both directions, with senior Chinese officials coming here, senior Americans going there.
And on that note, we still have sanctions on the defense minister for China for a deal he did with the Russian government to purchase Russian military equipment. Because the United States, we passed a law that not prevented, but again, sanctions people who do business with the Russian military to counter our adversary. So we sanctioned the guy, and that is why their defense minister refuses to speak to our defense minister, Lloyd Austin. So if Antony Blinken wants more of these lines of communication to open, perhaps we should drop these sanctions, which at this point are stupid and is preventing the two sides, our militaries, from talking. So that's on us in this case.
Second, it is about dealing directly, clearly, candidly, with the profound differences that we have. And at the very least, making sure that there's a greater understanding of where we're coming from, what our intent is, and hopefully learning a little bit more from them about where they're coming from and what their intent is. And then finally, there are areas where, if it's in our mutual interest, we should find ways to cooperate. We talked about that as well. But this is a long-term competition. As I said, I don't think there's a finish line, but we want to make sure that in that competition,
there is none.
We're in a position of strength where we are, as I said, able to shape what comes next. And I think, from my perspective at least, we are approaching this from a position of strength, precisely because of the investments we've made in our competitiveness, precisely because of the convergence that we built with key partners in Europe, key partners in Asia on how to approach the challenges that China poses.
Now, he's talking about getting together with our partners to build this coalition to promote our liberal world order. And I would push back on the idea that we have strengthened our position because Europe is not in a good place right now. France having their riots. The Dutch government just collapsed. Germany is going through this deindustrialization. The English, the UK, they're on their third prime minister in a year. And this all goes back to the war with Russia and Ukraine, the sanctions put on Russia, and the splitting of Russia from Europe, which is hurting Russia a little bit and hurting Europe a lot. And as their economic position diminishes, that actually helps China. And here in the United States domestically, our debt, $30+ trillion, inflation. If we want to combat China, we have to get our domestic situation under control and have the Europeans stable. But that's not the case. So China, right now, I think you're in the catbird seat, and you're just watching the Europeans and us here in the United States. You're watching us struggle. And I disagree with Blinken here. Our position has not strengthened, and if Russia wins this war in Ukraine, which they in all likelihood will, that strengthens China even more.
So I'm listening to you closely, and I was struck by your language, because you said our goal is to coexist peacefully. Well, I'm old enough, as are several people in this room, to remember where peaceful coexistence was the phrase that for decades dominated or characterized U.S.-Soviet relations. What are we to read into that?
Only that, again, neither of us is going away, so at a minimum, that has to be, I think, the baseline. As I said, we're determined to make sure that in everything that we're doing, the two different worlds that I tried to sketch briefly and what they might look like, the free, open, prosperous, secure world that we're trying to build, a somewhat different and more liberal model that others, including China, are driving toward, that our vision prevails.
And that is really the thing here. Two different visions, two great powers. Who wins out here? We have our vision, China has theirs. But I will say, he talks about the Cold War and the Soviet Union and just trying to coexist, not necessarily work together, but not blow up the entire world. There is one difference. I think but it's true. The United States and China economically are more attached. Our economies are more intertwined. We do a lot of business together, so we have more of an incentive to get along with China than we did with the Soviet Union. So perhaps we can do more than just coexist. Perhaps we can actually build something together for our mutual benefit. But the problem is, again, two great powers. There's always that urge by each power to be the preeminent power and be the one that calls all the shots. And we have entered into that battle right now with China. And of course, we're going to see where this goes to over the next several years.
Implicit in the phrase peaceful coexistence is less what you're trying to accomplish and more what you're trying to avoid. That was true of the Cold War. Do you think that's a fair characterization of the U.S.-China relationship? It's more what we're trying to avert rather than what we can realistically accomplish?
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think we have a responsibility.
Both
we have an obligation that we hear from around the world to manage the relationship responsibly, and that gets to the peaceful coexistence part. We hear this demand signal everywhere. But that doesn't mean that we're standing still. It doesn't mean that we're accepting that as the goal. But it is the foundation. And from there, as I say, we're in a competition. We want to make sure that in that competition to shape this new era, our vision prevails.
So let me raise what could be the greatest threat to that ability, which is Taiwan. And if I may quote Secretary of State Blinken, I always hate it when people quote me, by the way. Last October, you said, referring to Taiwan, what's changed is this: the decision by the government in Beijing that the status quo is no longer acceptable, that they wanted to speed up the process by which they would pursue unification. You just spent time there. You spoke to Wang Yi, you spoke to the foreign minister, you spoke to, obviously, President Xi. What take did you make on their views on Taiwan? Did you come away with any different sense of their either aspirations or, more important, timetables, risk propensities?
Let's start with this. I think my opening premise is that for the better part of 5 decades, this is a challenge and issue that we've actually managed responsibly. And doing that was premised on a few very basic principles. One is that any differences between Beijing and Taiwan would be resolved peacefully, that neither side would engage in unilateral changes to the status quo. And the result of that, the result of a consistent policy through multiple administrations, Republican, Democrat alike, founded on One China, has meant that we have managed it responsibly. I think what changed is this, at least in our judgment. Obviously, China has a different narrative. But if you go back to 2016, not last year, not just in recent months, but if you go back to 2016, we've seen Beijing taking actions that suggest that the status quo was not acceptable. And we've seen that in some of the military operations that they've been engaged in, the deployment of forces, the exercises, the missile tests, et cetera.
Sure.
We've seen that in the economic coercion exerted against Taiwan, and for that matter, exerted against countries that have relationships with Taiwan. We've seen that in the effort to pry Taiwan out of the international system. And all of this is a stirring of the pot that is antithetical to the preservation of the status quo. So one of the things that we try to communicate very clearly is not only the consistency of our policy and our approach and our determination to maintain the status quo, but also the concerns not just of the United States, but of countries around the world about anything, any actions that would disrupt it.
So let me stop right there because he's saying back in 2016, and this is on our side, that there was a change to the status quo by China because of military maneuvering, exercises, economic activity that was made against Taiwan to sort of strangle them and separate them from the international community. So it's our assertion, or the assertion of Antony Blinken, that it was China who disrupted the status quo back in 2016. So I'm curious to hear what people from China and Taiwan have to say about that. And I will also say that whether or not something is disrupting the status quo is somewhat subjective. What qualifies? Now, if China, in their view, will say, well, we're having military operations. Why wouldn't we? And if we're near Taiwan, it's only because Taiwan is so close by. So why is the United States interpreting this as a change in the status quo? So you can play that game where both sides will say, well, our actions aren't disrupting the status quo. It's your actions. But again, it's subjective. And it really, at the end of the day, it's a big game. I think both sides will do things to disrupt the status quo and claim they're not. And that's really the problem here.
And there's a very clear reason for this, even as China, of course, asserts that these are sovereign issues that should be relevant to no one else and of interest to no one else. We all know this, 50% of commercial traffic, trade, goes through that strait every single day. 50% of the container traffic in the world. 70% of the semiconductors that we use from everything from our smartphones to our washing machines to our automobiles made on Taiwan. If there were to be a crisis as a result of actions that either side takes that offline, you've got potentially a global economic crisis. It's one of the reasons, maybe the main reason, that country after country is going to both of us and saying we expect the responsible management of this issue to be sustained. That's exactly where we are, and I tried to share that very clearly and directly with our Chinese counterparts.
So I always say the at the bottom of every conflict is economics. 50% of container traffic, 70% of semiconductors. If China and Taiwan peacefully reunite, or militarily for that matter, if they reunite, they have control over that area, and that gives them tremendous economic power and leverage that the United States does not want China to have. So, from this viewpoint, I have to say, yes, we, the United States, do not want any reunification. That will be a loss of power for us. So, if we see the potential for unification, might we start saber rattling and start rattling the cage a little bit to try to prevent that from happening? Based on our past actions, the answer to that question is yes. So um, we're saying that we observe the one China policy, and that if China and Taiwan peacefully reunite, great. But at the same time, our neoconservatives in D.C. are probably thinking, we cannot let this happen. How do we prevent this? And that's really the situation here. It's all economics. We are worried about the economic power China will have and consolidate if the two nations, or I guess there's one, reunite peacefully.
Okay, so I agree with you on the stakes, and I agree that China over recent decades has, shall we say, moved to change the status quo in certain ways by what it's done militarily and diplomatically.
And we have to.
So 4 times your boss, the President of the United States, has said that the U.S. would help defend Taiwan if it were attacked by China, and 4 times the White House staff has walked him back. So what is our policy, and why aren't we basically telling China, within the context of one China policy, you've done things to increase the threat, we're going to do things to increase the your understanding that you cannot move against Taiwan with impunity?
Richard?
Yes, sir.
We continue to be guided by the One China policy based on the 3 communiques, the Taiwan Relations Act, and the 6 assurances. That hasn't changed, and that won't change.
So what he's saying here, Joe Biden, our president, keeps on saying things that go contrary to our quote-unquote official policy. Although I would argue that President Biden, as the executive, is the one who creates the policy, not Antony Blinken. So I guess it's within his right to say what he wants. But 4 times he has said that we will militarily defend Taiwan, and then the White House, they walk it back. And so the question is this some sort of strategic ambiguity? Is this a way for us to give mixed signals to the Chinese to confuse them? Or, and this is the problem, or is Biden simply suffering from dementia, brain dead, and he will randomly just say whatever off the top of his head, not thinking about the consequences? Which one is it? Strategic ambiguity, or Biden's, I won't say that word, a knucklehead? I don't know. I'm going to lean toward the latter, because I don't really think he's that in charge because of his condition. But it does actually give us that strategic ambiguity, ironically enough, which can be advantageous for the United States, who may not want to state explicitly what we would do if China were to attack Taiwan, because we no longer have a military treaty with Taiwan that we used to have that expired back in the late 70s, I think 1979. So we're not required to go to war if Taiwan attack. And would we? Biden says yes. The White House says no. His White House staff says no. But based on Ukraine, what's our precedent? Are we going to step in and put our soldiers in danger to protect Taiwan? We have it in Ukraine. We have it in other parts of the world. Would we do it in Taiwan, or just use Taiwan as a proxy to do all the fighting? I don't know. I lean toward the latter. I think we would just give Taiwan weapons and say good luck and hope that you guys do a lot of damage to China, which is our basic policy right now at Russia. Here's the weapons, do as much damage as you can, but we're not going to actually stick our necks out and protect you. I think that's what we would do with Taiwan. But there are crazy people in D.C., and again, 50% of the container traffic, the semiconductors, so much economic power goes toward China. Would we fire some missiles off from our ships and get involved? I don't think so, but who knows? That's why we need communication and de-escalation.
Mr. Secretary, we can do all that and still increase the certainty that with which we communicate to China that we are there for Taiwan if they use coercion.
And I think it's evident not only in what we're saying, but also in what we're doing, that we are there for Taiwan. Under the Taiwan Relations Act, we've had a longstanding policy of making sure that we could do what's necessary to help Taiwan defend itself. That policy and the sort of rheostat on it also depends a lot on what Beijing is doing or not doing. And that was designed in from the get-go, including in the communiques.
So I'm going to stop it there, but I find it interesting. Richard Haas, the president of the CFR, pushing back, saying, "Okay, that's all well and good, about walking back what Biden said, but don't we really need to reassert that we're going to, be there for Taiwan and to push back against China?" And he points out the Taiwan Relations Act, but that's a unilateral thing. That is not a treaty with Taiwan. Again, that treaty, that defense treaty expired, and we have no legal obligation to intervene. Only we say that, again, in the Taiwan Relations Act, that we would provide weapons, we would do this and that. But again, it's not a treaty, it's unilateral, it's our official government position as signed into law by the president, because it is, a bill passed by Congress. So interesting. Taiwan, I warn you, as these tensions ramp up, and if it ever came to it, where you are relying on the United States to be there for you if you were to be attacked, and I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but hey, I've been wrong before about other things as far as military action. Don't trust that we're going to be there for you. We talk a big game, but will we push that red button and go to war with a rival power that has nuclear weapons to defend you? Are you worth that to us? Ultimately, I don't think so. So in 2024, you have another election. It's your country. Do what you want. But keep that in mind when you look at your leaders, ones who are antagonistic and want to, join the West and go along with the United States in our games, and leaders who want to be more peaceful with China. And it's your choice. It's your country. Who am I to say which way you should go? But as an American, looking at my government, I just warn people out there, you can't trust us. You're not part of the United States. We don't have any defense treaty with you. Ultimately, we are going to look out for number one, and number one is the United States, not Taiwan or any other country out there. We do what's best for us, and honestly, you should do what is best for you, whatever that is. So I hope you all the best in that that scenario, in that situation. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.